Okay, in this video I'm going to go over how to use and create a coating layer. So this is good for anything where you want something that's transparent, like a thicker layer that's on top of another material. So in this case I have this kind of like gritty, it was meant to be like a stone material that was like coated in some kind of clear coat that dried and over the years kind of worn away. So you can see in some areas it's already worn away. And I also was just doing some little elements here just to make it kind of show how you can set this up. So here on this side is my setup. So let's go ahead and hide the coating. So this is what my material looks like without the coat. Okay. I want to break it down a little bit just to show you guys how I made this, but this is going to be, I'm not going to focus on this. I'm just going to be focusing on the coating. So I have essentially my base layer. I just made some adjustments to the roughness using a levels node. I made an anchor point to this so I can reference this surface somewhere else. I have this paint layer right here, which has like some partial replacement on the height. So actually, no, this one, yeah, this one should have, oh, okay, sorry. So this is just the material properties. So on this one, I just have color and I guess it does have some height. Okay, never mind. Sorry. So I have color, height, roughness, metal, normal. I'm not doing any metalness stuff here, but I just made a layer here that I wanted to feel like a paint stroke. Then I added some height to it, just referencing the anchor point, adding anchor point on this mask, right? So I had this mask, and on this one, I just grabbed that mask and blurred it a little bit so I could have a soft slope up for height. And then I did this kind of shape right here, or this removal right here. So I was just removing some chunks just to give it some variation, like maybe some bubbles or something like that that was in the paint. And then I added this custom kind of stroke feeling, like bristles were like kind of dragging through it. And that's literally, this is just a height layer right here. You say it's got normal, which if I did linear dodge add, right, it would mix with the layers below it, but normal just replaces the layer below with height. But if I look down again at this layer, oh, okay, right, this is a paint layer. So I painted just with a paintbrush that had height on it. Okay, so that's my base material, right? Mostly I just wanted something that had like normals information and specular response just so we can see the effects of a clear coat. All right, so in order for a clear coat to work in Substance Painter, you need to have a coat material preset set up. So if you could either do it that way or we can add it, but when you create a new file and you go ahead and go from here, you could choose coated, right? So if you do Adobe Standard Material, PBR, Metallic Roughness Coated, it'll already have those material properties set up. But if you wanted to, what you would do is down here, so you can see I have coat opacity, normal, roughness, and color. You can just come over to the texture set settings. Like let's say you only had color, height, roughness, metal, normal. You just click on this button right here and you can add new material properties. That's not the only thing you need to make that work. You also need to come over here to the shader settings and you have to come down, you need to find coat and enable that. So that just enables the rendering of the coat properties. Just like if you were doing subsurface scattering, you would have to come in here to turn on subsurface scattering, and same thing with displacement. So once we got that set up, I had to pause because I wanted to make an adjustment to this. What I did here is I just made a fill layer below so I can turn this off and we can just see a normal base material layer. And then I've just gone ahead and added a fill layer. So I'll just do that again, add a fill layer. This one's, I'm just going to be showing my coat properties. So we're going to go ahead and come here. We'll turn off all our other material properties on this fill layer. It's only the coat ones. You can see C opacity, C normal, C roughness, C color, right? And so you're not going to see the coat yet, but as soon as you turn on coat opacity, you can see it creates this secondary layer on top, or the appearance of a secondary layer on top as if it has a coating, right? So you can see there's information below, it responds to light, it has light and shadow, and this thing sits completely on top of it. It's like overriding on top of it. And usually I don't go full opacity, usually I bring it down to like something like right around a little over half, right? So you can still see the lighting effect, but see, we get specular response here on my paint stroke, but we're also getting a specular response above that that's not even affected by the height at all. So the layers below it have their own normals, and this coat layer will also have its own normals information I can add. I can add bump and scratch surface information. So we have our coat opacity. Coat normal will give us height information on this layer. Coat roughness is, as you would expect, it's going to change the roughness of the coating, right? Is it blurry or is it glossy, right? And we can, as you would expect, also plug in texture maps into this stuff, right? So we can plug in a texture map into that layer, or we can plug in, do the typical black masking kind of workflow. And then we have coat color, which is going to be like an absorption tinting. So it's going to tint the information that's coming through, right? So you can see when I turn on that coat color, you can see all the lighting information that is coming through from the bottom layers is actually changing color. So you can see it's tinting it. So this is like as if the material isn't actually clear, it has like a slight color to it. So it's going to affect the light and the information that's coming through. So those are the 4 material properties that we want to care about. There's some other ones that if you did this setup, you would get also, let's see, coat specular level. Don't worry about that one. We really don't want to mess with that one. That's just going to change how much specular light is reflecting. I'm just going to use the opacity for that in my case. Cool. So that's the 4 settings we have to worry about. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that. So here I have my coding layer here set up, and you can see it's a little bit more complex. So what I did here is we'll go one at a time. So first I set up my coat layer. So I just went ahead and brought my opacity up a little higher. I don't have any normals on it right now. I have a roughness, and then I set it to have a tint color to it, so that it tints the light coming through. And obviously the more opaque this material is, the more that coat color is going to be affected. Okay, and then I added some roughness breakup. So this channel is just affecting coat roughness, and then I have obviously like a wipey mask, so it looks like it's been wiped and scratched maybe. This layer is a little bit more confusing. This one's going to be a bit tricky. So in this one, what I'm doing is I'm referencing a height channel into the normals. So it's actually grabbing something that's down here. I'm going to go ahead and pull it out because I probably shouldn't have put it there. So let's go ahead and hide that. We'll call this one base material. And then this is going to be, I called it a reference layer. So this one's really tricky because the kind of annoying thing about this is that the coding material attribute only has a normals attribute. It doesn't have a height attribute, right? Height's really easy to work with. Normals is kind of hard to author to, right? Like paint and draw things. So what I did is I did a height map. So I essentially painted what was the equivalent of a height map, and then I converted it over into normals. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. We'll call this one starter. So this is just going to be always going to be the very bottom. Just make sure I have texture info in every single channel if anything ever goes transparent. So here we have this. I'm going to pull it all the way up to the top. It'll stop working once it goes above, but so you can see that stops working because I'm referencing it. And if a reference is above the layer that's referencing it, quote normals, then it breaks the reference. So anyways, let's go ahead and hide all this stuff, and we're just going to show this. So you see this layer right here just has a map plugged into the height information, right? So I just plugged one of these black and white maps into here, and then I played around with a balance to control how frequent I want those spots to be. And then on that layer, so this is just feeding into the height, I've gone ahead and added a filter called height to normal. What that does is it takes the height channel and it also writes this information into a normal map or normal information. So this layer now has both height and normal information, even if I don't have, I mean, I could turn on normal if I want to. Even if I don't have normal activated, it is actually writing this into the normal as well. I don't know if it would show up here. Oh yeah, cool. So yeah, if I didn't have that height to normal, it wouldn't be there. It would only be in the height channel, but because I have this height to normal, it's going ahead and writing it into the normal map. Okay, you do have to kind of check and just make sure it's doing it the right direction, but let's not worry about that right now. Okay, cool. So let's put this back down. So this layer, I don't actually want to be affecting anything. This is just a layer I want so I could use an anchor point so I can grab it. So I'm going to go ahead and hide that. So over here up in coding, let's go ahead and turn that back on. This coat normals, what it's doing is, let's go ahead and get that height. I think I had pushed it. Okay, I messed up something, but it's okay. So coming back to this, coat normals, right? You can see, oh, let's go ahead and make sure base layer's on. Okay, cool. I'm getting stuff in the height or the coat normals now. It's super subtle, but you can see it right there, right? So it's making it look like there's like this little dent or scratch in there. So that's how we can get some height. If you wanted to make it bumpy, right, we would do the same thing. We just change this map here to be something else, right? Like if I did, let's say, spots. Let's do, well, actually, that's kind of what I already have. Let's do like something like that, right? And let's do tiling, right? So this is just like a bumpy texture, right? So this is doing the same thing. If I look at that coat normal, right, you can see it's got that information in it. That's coming from this layer's height channel. Okay, so let's Control Z that. I just want this one. Okay, so that's how we can add height information to our coat layer and not affect the layer below it, right? I'm not actually adding that information to the base layer. So if I hide the coat layer, none of that information is actually going to be coming through down there. Okay, and the last thing I did was, you don't usually want your coat to be fully opaque all the time, right? Like especially if it's worn down over time, right? Like let's say it's a varnish on some wood on a tabletop, or it's the clear coat on your car paint, or it's like the coating on your guitar and it's a really old guitar, right? Over time, that the top level wears away. So here I have this remove coat layer. And so you can see here, there's actually parts where that clear coat is no longer visible. And so the height from below is kind of poking through. This would be like as if the information or the surface was rubbed against over time, and then it get thinner and thinner and thinner. And as it gets thinner, it shows the surface below. So on this layer right here, all I'm really doing is I also have the color opacity. I don't know why I really changed. Oh, sorry. This is affecting the actual surface color. So this is affecting the diffuse color right there of the layer below, because I want it to feel like it was, since it's exposed, it's also getting tinted with like, I don't know, something. And then opacity, I'm just setting it to 0, right? So that's just hiding the clear coat on those areas. And then I just used some kind of mask, right? So in this case, I'm referencing those little spots. I'm blurring them a little bit, and then I'm also found this curvature map. And this curvature map, you can see I'm using the height information, like that bumpy height information, right? So like my base material has, like you can see the shapes of my base material actually showing through, right? So that little square right there is actually showing through, and it's actually in this mask. And so normally you can't do that, right? Like you would have to like maybe do an anchor point on a mask and hope the mask can go in here. But I'm actually using what's called this right here is a mask generator. So you'll find that, and you can see this is using the old version of it, but you can find those all in here, right? Like you have all these different smart masks, or you can search for um, curvature right there, or you could do ambient occlusion, right? And so you can use those as different masks, and so you can drag or call in geometry information, right? Like if I wanted to create a mask that's based on edges, which is what this one's doing, or cavities, then you would grab one of these smart masks, or you look for ambient occlusion, thickness, curvature, right? And I had to turn off, it wasn't in a specific category, so I had to turn those off. So what I did was I found in the smart mask area, I think I found, I liked this like soft damage, I think it was. It was one of these guys, soft damage, or one of these other masks here, maybe dirt, dirt ground or something like that. Something that had an edge detect on it. And then when I came in here, I'll turn off what I'm using, what's called micro textures. So see, this is what I got when I brought it in, right? If we look at this, we're revealing the clear coat fades away, right? But it's not really responding to the surface below it. And for most surfaces, that's okay, right? Like if you had a surface that was like pretty smooth underneath, like your base layer was pretty smooth, maybe that's okay. But for me, I have this really crunchy, grungy kind of shaping to it. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to actually reference that in this mask. So in order to do that, because this is using curvature, I also wanted to grab the curvature of my bump details. And that is called, in Substance Painter, something called micro details. So normally these mesh maps, right? So this thing about curvature, ambient occlusion, thickness, height, the directionality of the surface. Anything that's being used as a mask like that is found under our bake maps, right? So you can, or our mesh maps. So you can come over here, right? Here's one of our mesh maps. Here's world space normals. Here's our ambient occlusion. Here's our curvature. Here's our position. Here's our thickness. So all of those are being used in all of these masks. So that's what's calling those. So if I come back over here, I'm pressing Alt and clicking on that so that I can isolate this mask. If I want, so normally it's based on your object. It's not based on any of the texturing work you've done, right? It doesn't understand or know to reference any of this information here. But on these mask generators, you can activate this thing called micro details. Micro details will grab information from the layers. So it'll actually reference texturing work and not just modeling information. So in this case, I turned on micro details, and under micro details, I turned on, I didn't need micro normal, but I turned on micro height. And then down here, you can see there's this layer right here is micro normal and micro height. So I brought an anchor point of the surface, that the height surface that I want to bring in and use this as a mask. So if I come down here back to my base material, my base layer, which has all that kind of craggy, like rocky surface, I wanted to reference that in my clear coat damage wear layer. So I created a anchor point here. So I just created an anchor point, made sure it had a good name. So said, let's call this rocky layer. So we'll call it rocky layer. And we'll just call this one rocky layer. Layer, just so I know. And then this one right here would probably be base layer. So that's just my base layer that I always have. That just is just an empty fill layer that just has, I say empty, but it doesn't have texture information. It just has standard information in it. So I'm referencing that. And then up here in my clear coat, right here, I'm referencing in that anchor point. So I'll just get rid of this. So if we came in here, I wanted to turn on micro height so that I can use the curvature of texture layer, right? So I turned micro details on, so true, turned height on, true. Now I need to load in which layer I'm going to reference. So I'm going to come over here to micro height right here, or you can load in a texture map, and I'm going to go ahead and find my rocky layer. So by default, it doesn't know which channel to look in, right? So right now it's using its color channel, which is kind of cool because the color is corresponding to the height a little bit anyways. So it does correspond to the shapes a little bit. But realistically, what I want the height of that bottom surface to be affecting how thick or thin that clear coat is. So you can see right here, it's referencing the color channel. So instead, which, the color channel looks like this, right? So it's referencing this layer. I want this layer, which doesn't look like much, but there's information here. The height channel is always, I think, misleading. So let's go over here to height there. And so now it's using the height of that surface down below to control that. And then the only thing I would have to do is I would want to mask out this brush mark right here, or have the brush mark be part of this too. So it's thinner or thicker at certain parts. But it's kind of overriding through it into the clear coat just because it's not understanding it doesn't matter. On this micro height, it just doesn't know there's a paint stroke there. So, but let's not worry about that right there. So anyways, that's how I set this up in Substance Painter. So now let's get it out of Substance Painter. So what I'm doing is I'm bringing it over to Renderman. So I'm going to go to File, Export Textures, and I'm going to want to export Renderman Pixar Surface. So the problem is Pixar Surface, if we go look at it, output templates, or actually we can look at list of exports. It does a diffuse map, a displacement map, a glow map, a normal map, presence map, specular face color, and specular roughness map. We need all those, but none of those have anything to do with coat layers, right? So what we need to do is we need to adjust that or make a custom one. So I already have mine right here, but what we're going to do is we're just going to go over to our output templates. We're going to click on this, which is copy or duplicate our template. I'll call this one Pixar surface underscore coat layers. There we go. So here, personally, in my case, well, we can always leave it here, but I know I'm not going to need a spec. Let's not mess with them too much. Okay, well, I would get rid of some of these, but we don't need to. All right. So first off, we want to essentially get the information from our texture set here, right? So we have coat color, we have coat roughness, we have coat normal, and coat opacity. So we definitely need coat opacity, we definitely need coat normal, we definitely need coat roughness. Coat color, I'm just using a solid color on that one, so I didn't ever do any texturing in that one. So in my case, I could probably get away with not having that one, but if you did want that one, you could totally do it. So let's go ahead and go back to exporting our textures. Let's go to those output templates. We'll go back down to Pixar Surface coat layers. And to create a new texture output, I'm going to click on an RGB map. So this one's going to be for, actually, let's do grayscale. So we're going to do a grayscale map. And so you can, if you want to know, like, which one should I be doing? You can look at these ones here, right? Like a roughness map, right? It's just like a 0 to 1 value. So it only takes a single color channel. So it's grayscale. Whereas things like diffuse color and normal map, those are color maps, so they take all 3 color channels. So I'll create a, for the mask, for the opacity of my coat opacity, I'm going to go ahead and add a grayscale mask. And I'm just going to copy one of these naming conventions because I want it to kind of match the same naming convention as the rest of my maps. But I'm going to change the diffuse color part instead to be coat opacity. Okay. And then now we need to connect something. So let's go ahead and go to coat opacity is going to connect to this texture map. We're going to grab it from the gray channel. And then let's go ahead and do coat normals. So, and it's good for us to look back at the normal map. So this one says 16-bit PNG RGB, right? So it's color map and it's got 16 bits. So we're going to go ahead and change this one to 16 bits. RGB, that's great. And then we're going to go over to coat normal. And we're going to go ahead and drag this over to here. And we're going to go ahead and do RGB channels. So from the coat normals RGB channels to this texture maps RGB channels. And what we're going to do is we'll just go ahead and copy the normal channel. So we'll just copy that. And then for normal, we'll just put coat in front of it, coat normal. Okay. And we're going to go ahead and do the same thing for a gray map for the roughness. And we're going to do, we'll do one for the color. Why not? So this one is going to be, just copy this one. This one's going to be coat color. So coat color. And then this one's going to be coat roughness. Okay, so we're just going to attach the coat roughness to the grayscale and attach the coat color to the coat color RGB channels. Okay, so now when I come back over here, I want to go ahead and make sure I select the right one, Pixar Surface Coat Layers, export my texture maps, and click export. So I've already set this up, but let's go ahead and switch over to Renderman. Okay, here's my results from Renderman, and here's me looking at it in Substance Painter. So you can see I need to make some adjustments, like my color is slightly different. I can change the thickness on this coating, but you can see it's got the same exact kind of. Okay, so let's go ahead and build this up from scratch. So I'm going to come in here, I'm going to go assign new material. We're going to go ahead and add on a Pixar surface in this case. We could use a llama layer surface, but that's a little more complicated and would take a little bit more time. So I have my material set up. Let's go ahead and open the hypershade. And I also have my attribute editor over here. We don't need the shader ball. Okay, so let's go over to the surface. So we have our default map. So let's go ahead and I'm going to bring this a little bit darker. And let's make sure that this is responding right. Okay, we got IPR. Okay, there we go. So let's go back here. Okay. To activate our specular, we either would have to turn up face color and edge color or switch over to physical and turn on edge color, which we're going to go ahead and do that. And then to activate clear coat, we need to come down here to this thing called clear coat. So rough specular, clear coat, and primary specular are all kind of doing the same thing. They just add on to each other. So you can have multiple reflection lobes on top of each other. Clear coat does have some specific or special things to it. But for the most part, you know, primary specular, rough specular, and clear coat can be theoretically used interchangeably, but for your purposes, if you're new to this kind of stuff and you don't understand what that means, just stick to primary specular and then clear coat if you're doing a coating. So I'm going to come over here to clear coat, same thing, I'm going to switch it down to physical. And here we have a couple things. We have the same similar setup or settings as our primary specular, right? We don't have extinction coefficient, which is used primarily for metals. So we can't really do a metal here very easily unless we switched it over to artistic. But same thing, if I need to turn this on, I would go ahead and turn on, um, turn the edge color up here. And then we're just going to bring the roughness up a little bit. So you can see there's two different roughness lobes. There's one on the top and there's one on the bottom. So you can see if I get rid of this one, or let's make this one really broad. So we'll just make it, you can see it spreading underneath the layer below. And if I brought that dimmer to, you can see this is the clear coat. So they're essentially just like when we were looking at inside of Substance Painter, it has two different specular lobes on top of each other. We also have absorption tint, so this is going to be like that coat color. So we can come in here and we're going to go ahead and set the saturation. Let's go ahead and push this up. And it's not going to do anything by default, but as soon as you start turning the thickness up, it will start absorbing light going through it. So you can see as we turn this thickness up, it gets this absorption tint gets more and more effective, right? It's not changing the upper layers specular reflections, but of course it's coloring the specular reflections underneath that's going through it, right? Let's bring this down a little bit. So you can see there's that specular reflection on the base layer that's underneath the coating, and of course that's getting affected because, you know, it's underneath this brownish, orangish material. Okay, so now let's go ahead and start attaching our texture maps. So let's set up our texture maps that we're used to. So let's do Pixar texture. And that's probably over here somewhere. Let's do that. I'm going to go ahead and just duplicate this a couple times. And here we go. And then we're also going to need a Pixar normal map. We're going to need two of them, so I'm going to do duplicate that again. So we got two normal maps. Okay. So let's go ahead and this one's going to be my diffuse color. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and grab my diffuse color. So here, this is not very well organized, but here I can find my diffuse color.png. And we're going to plug that obviously into diffuse color like we would expect. Let's go ahead and turn off the clear coat for a second. Or actually, let's just set this absorption tint to white. Or actually, let's just reset this. Revert to default value. There we go. And then revert to default value, and then this one revert to default value. Okay. So we have our color map coming in. We don't have any clear coat on right now. We'll get rid of our specular. So color map looks wrong. I'm not using ASYS, I'm using linearize RGB. So I have to come over to this map and click linearize to get it to look like my diffuse color. So that looks right now. So, you know, always do these one at a time just to make sure if something looks wrong, you know what it is. You don't want all of your texture maps working at the same time and your stuff looks wrong and you can't diagnose what it is because there's just too much information, right? So now I know my diffuse color map looks right. Okay, so now let's do specular roughness, spec rough. Okay, this one's going to go into the specular roughness, and we're going to go ahead and find that specular roughness. So let's go specular roughness, open. I'm pressing 2 to collapse this down, so it just shows the output. This one does not linearize. We only linearize the color maps. And so this one, where if we turn up that specular edge color and that index refraction, let's actually bring this index refraction down. So there's actually a list here we can do. So 1.4, let's do it 1.45. I just want it slightly less reflective. So you can see we're getting all our bumpy specular hits. Now let's go ahead and plug in our normal map. So we'll call this one normal map. Okay. Result normal, that goes into bump normal. And we're just going to go ahead and find the image. Let's see, normal map. All right, so that's giving me my height information. And if you ever want to kind of compare before and after, what you can do is you can come over here and right click the image and say command snapshot no AOV. And then now let's go ahead and just bring the bump scale down to 0. Let that clean up a bit so we can see the difference between with the normal map, without the normal map. Cool. So thank you, normal map. All right, so let's go ahead and bring that back up. So value 1. You might, if you didn't do your set up your project correctly, like set it so it has OpenGL for Renderman, you would have to change this orientation to, I think, DirectX. I can't remember if you turn it to OpenGL or DirectX. I can't remember, but you know, it might export out a DirectX oriented normal map, and so your normals might look flipped. So just double check that stuff. And like I said, you know, oh, that's weird. Okay, I don't want that. What the heck? How did I do that? Okay, there we go. Same thing as, you know, I'm fine, but if I wanted to check my normal map, I would probably just like disconnect these guys. And then let's go ahead and bring this value down a little bit. And I would look at those normals and see if they feel like they're facing the right way. Like light's coming from this direction, and then the cast shadows going over here. So, I mean, it feels sort of right. I think it looks good. Yeah, it feels like it's popping out and it's facing the right way. So I always do that. I always disconnect my specular and color map and just look at my normal map just to see how it's doing. I'm getting some like really dark edges, which is just from my normal map being pushed too far, right? Like if I brought this down, it's a lot less noticeable. But since I'm not going to be using displacement on this one, I'm going to leave it there because I do want all that information. All right, so we can plug our roughness map back to our specular roughness, our diffuse map back to our diffuse color. All right, so now we got to do our coat stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and just get two more Pixar texture maps, right? So I know I'm going to need a specular roughness, specular opacity, and specular or coat color. So let's see, coat color. This one's going to be coat opacity, and this one right here is going to be coat rough, and this one right here is going to be coat normal. So this is just a Pixar normal map node, and these ones are Pixar textures. Coat color has to be linearized because it's going to be color information. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and plug those in. So you can see some of them show up and not all of them show up. So like we don't see coat normals, but we do see coat edge color. So we had coat opacity. You'll notice coming in here, there is no coat opacity setting, but we can tell that in order to turn our coat layer on, we have to turn this edge color up, right? So that's what's giving us so the normal map is making this kind of confusing, right? So if I turn off the normal map, you can see we have that double layer on. But the normal map is currently, the underlying normal map is currently affecting both the coat layer and the diffuse and specular, which we're going to fix that by having our own coat normal map. So anyways, so that was a little misleading. So we know that this is essentially controlling turning on and off our coat layer. So this is essentially going to be our coat opacity. So our coat opacity layer, let's go ahead and find that map. So let's see, I called mine coat mask when I exported it earlier. So coat mask. And I'm going to just plug a single color channel since it's a black and white map into, oh, actually, no, it's black and white. Since this is coat edge color, once a color input, I'm going to go ahead and plug the whole RGB into coat edge color. So there we go. So now it's kind of hard to see, but there's some areas right here that are being lost, right? So if we isolate that, like areas right here where there's no coding, and then areas over here where there is coding. Cool, so that's exactly what we wanted. So the coat opacity map is now plugged in correctly. Set that to 2. All right, so the roughness, that one's pretty easy. Let's go over here. Let's go to coat roughness. So coat rough, okay? And then we're just going to plug that one into clear coat roughness. And y'all's is obviously going to take a while to process. Mine is going really quickly because, you know, I already had my texture maps created and converted in Renderman. You expect to wait a little bit or stop your renders so they process faster. I might have to adjust this, right? So if I feel like it's too rough, I might use a remap node. So let's do a remap node. So Pixar remap here. We'll take the input color and then the result R here to clear coat roughness. There we go. And then if we want it to be glossier, we'll just bring the gain down, right? Which makes the reflection sharper. Let's look at this map. Oh, what the heck? Oh, I didn't, the map's not, oh, shoot. Plugging in the wrong one. Duh. Okay. Here we go. That's why it was not looking right. Okay. There we go. Okay. Let's take a look at this. Okay, so I probably don't have to do this one, but this remap node will let you adjust the values of your roughness map. So now you can see that's really glossy. I probably didn't need to do that. But if I did want to make an adjustment, in Renderman to the overall roughness values in my roughness map, I can just darken it. So this is just using darkening it or brightening it if I want it rougher. Glossier, rougher. Let's just make it a little glossier. Okay, I'm just pressing 1 just to collapse that down. Okay, so here's that. So that we got the coat roughness, and you can see the coat roughness is on top, and we also have our underlying just base specular roughness underneath. So that's all cool. Our coat color. So let's go ahead and open that. So in this case, I don't know if I actually made, oh, I didn't export my textures. So in this case, I didn't export them, but I would go ahead and grab that coat color, and I would go ahead and plug that into my absorption tint. And since absorption tint's not showing up here, what we're going to do is we're going to middle mouse click drag this onto absorption tint. And we're going to say result RGB from our texture map. So this is our Pixar tech. Oh, oops, they're backwards. Inputs is over here. So let's disconnect this. Let's close that. That got backwards. So absorption tint. All right. So on the left-hand side is my coat information. On the right-hand side is my, oh, okay, here's my texture map. Yeah, okay. Result RGB going into our clear coat absorption tint. So that would be coloring our texture map. Or I could use it doesn't matter. Okay, so in this case, if we had that color map, it'd work. I didn't have that one, so I went ahead and just changed that color myself. So I gave it like that kind of orangey sort of color that I had in my reference. And again, I just dialed up that layer thickness to kind of tint it a little bit. Okay. And then the only thing that was left was to get our coat normal. So same thing over here. If we go under advanced, we have our bump map here for our coat. We're just going to go ahead and middle mouse click and drag that there. And we just need to go ahead and load in our map. So let's go to coat normal. Open. Okay. And then we need to turn back on our normal bump map, which we had turned off earlier. So we go ahead and set that bump scale to 1. There we go. So that underlying information, oh, it feels a little tense. So I'm going to bring that down a little bit. So there we go. So now we have our coat on top. It has its height, scratch, bumpy stuff on it. Let's go minimize that stuff down. So let's go ahead and just focus on this guy. So it has some of the bumps and scratches in it. It has some of the holes and dents. It has its own roughness. The layer below has its own height and roughness channel. Things are a little glossy, so I probably need to adjust that remap node that I have. We can see here, if I zoom in on this, we got that area where the code is disappearing and we're seeing the underlying layer, right? Again, we can adjust that more if we want that to be more prominent in Substance Painter or in here. But that's essentially how we set up Clear Coat in Renderman and go from Substance Painter to Renderman with it.